Okay, a little history lesson. 1917, the first film production studio in Canada was built in Trenton, Ontario, on the aptly named Film Street. 1,500 silent films were made between then and 1934, when technological disruption came in, the talkies. And the Ontario government, which owned the studio, decided not to make further investments in the film industry, and they tore the studio down. I'm relieved, because I was born in a bungalow on Film Street, number 91 and a half Film Street in Trenton, Ontario in 1965. That's a cute baby there. And so from that beginning with the film industry, I went to Queen's Engineering School, got my engineering degree. From there, I went to Sauder School of Business, got my MBA. And then after a bit of a twisted path, I ended up in the television animation industry at Studio B Productions for 10 years and Atomic Cartoons for 10 years. I just retired from Atomic Cartoons 2 months ago. Thanks, Mom. So the industry overall, how big is it? Speakers before, we all agree, we're not lying. There are 60,000 people working directly in the industry, 4,000 of them in animation, 4,000 of them in VFX. Let's talk about those 60,000 direct employees and compare it to another industry that will hopefully resonate with many of you, the beer industry. So the brewery at the south end of the Burrard Street Bridge is a 3-hectare site with 260 people. Let's take those 60,000 people and build them a building, shall we? If we take those 60,000 people and apply them to the same job density as that brewery, what we've got is under one roof a studio that is the size of the green box there. It goes all the way from the Chapter store at Granville and Broadway out to King Edward and all the way to Fraser Avenue. That would be the size of the building. It would cover every square inch of that territory. 60,000 direct jobs in the industry. It would dominate the city. Okay, on the left-hand side, I'm going to talk about animation now. So on the left-hand side of the page, these are brands that you recognize because you're old. On the right side of the page, these are brands that your children and maybe even your grandchildren recognize because those are the shows that are made here in Vancouver, the animated TV series that are made here in Vancouver, along with hundreds of episodes of animation by these brands that, unless you work in the industry, you've never heard of. These are effectively the lion's share of the animation studios in Vancouver and in some other parts of BC, notably Kelowna and on Vancouver Island. So now I want to take you, I think, inside an animation studio, but I want to talk about the product. The product travels like crazy. Atomic Betty on the left-hand side was made by my company, Atomic Cartoons, in the early 2000s. It's distributed in 180 countries around the world. 180. The United Nations has 190 countries. If you took a look at the studio space in 1999, when I started in the industry, there's been a technological transformation. At Studio B in 1999, 60 people, 4 computers, accounting had 2 of them. That's an animation studio in the lower right hand now, where there are more computers than people in the studio. The workforce is young. It observes all the child labor laws, but it is young. The average age in the studios in Vancouver is 31 years old. I was the oldest person at Atomic Cartoons when I joined 10 years ago. I was the oldest person the day I left, and I'm bitter about that. Everybody that works in those studios has some kind of post-secondary diploma or degree or certificate, resulting in some very high wages. $70,000 per year for every worker in the animation industry, compared to the provincial average in 2017 of a little bit under $50,000. So these are good paying jobs. History. The industry was started in the 1980s by Marv Newland, who started International Rocket Ship, and he made such illustrious films as Lupo the Butcher, Hooray for Sandbox Land, and Bambi vs. Godzilla. These were art house films, and he was the only game in town. From those very auspicious beginnings, you can trace the family tree of animation studios in town. All of these studios, created in the 90s, were created by entrepreneurs who were also artists, many of them who worked for Marv. All of these had aspirations to make television series for the TV market in the United States. Now, we have a very different ecosystem, if you will, that's dominated by bigger players, and many of them are international. Sony Imageworks, Animal Logic, an Australian company, Bardell's been bought by an Italian company, and there are still Canadian players in the space, but the studios are much, much bigger now. And I would say better financed. The ecosystem is very supportive, as Peter has indicated earlier. There's a lot of important stakeholders, including the province, the educational institutions, and some super industry associations, including MPA and CMPA, that help all the competitors see eye to eye. See what I did there? Thanks, Mum. So what are the challenges in front of us? Okay, first of all, talent. We've got an incredible talent shortage in animation, and I wouldn't just say it's volume, I would say it's type as well. Our challenge moving forward is to get more storytellers in the business, to get more creators, more writers, more directors, and more producers. That's the challenge that's in front of us as an animation industry. The second big challenge facing entrepreneurs and studio owners is technology. I think the reason we've got bigger players in the industry now is because of the significant technological investment required. It's changed the face of distribution, production, and everything else that the industry touches. The other challenge we have is with our social contract with society, and I think we're failing on our social contract with society in the area of inclusion. I think we do better than many industries around, but we fall short in gender representation, we fall short in Aboriginal representation, and we fall short in representation from those with disabilities. We can do better, and we're uniquely positioned to do better, and I'm optimistic that that will change in the future. The last thing I'll say is that the other challenge facing us is keeping all our stakeholders in the boat with us. Government, the entrepreneurs, the industry associations, the educational institutions, the customers, and the talent all need to stay in the stable boat together. You don't have to go back very far, 100 years, to see what happens when one major player pulls out of the industry and an entire industry collapses in Trenton, Ontario, 100 years ago. Thank you.